Okay, well, let's get started this morning. I have a lot of things I'd like to talk about. This week's update I've titled, let me just add, I was just adding one slide here. I apologize for that. No, I don't. I don't apologize. This week is, did you see this? And boy, there again, once again, there was a lot of things that we were, I was looking at this week, just a tremendous amount of information. And so let's, and I apologize if I'm a little distracted, it's very noisy in the back right at the moment. So I'm trying to concentrate while I talk because I want to listen to what's going on back there, obviously. And, but we talk each week about the convergence of events and the things that seem to be piling up. I watch a lot of different prophecy websites and people who do updates and that sort of thing. And a lot of people are using the convergence thing now because it just seems like there's so much that's happening. So let's look at some of the things that happened this week. I want to expand on some of the things that I said last week. This continues to be a problem. Swollen rivers choke shipping as misery worsens in the Midwest. This continues to be a problem. And if, on your way to church this morning, I'm sure you drove past a lot of fields and one golf course that I've played many times that is unplayable today because there's so much water laying around. And this is a problem. And now, you notice that it was cold this week. While farmers are starting to get some of their crops in the field, the ground is cold. I mean, what was it like? I came home the other night, Thursday or Friday night, it was 41-degree wind chill. And it got down into the 40s a couple nights. That's not good for new seeds that are in the ground. They may not germinate. It is becoming a major crisis. I don't know what the yields are going to be this year, but everything that I've seen, you remember the old saying, knee high for corn, knee high by the 4th of July? And last year, I remember I was by some cornfields. It happened to be next to a golf course, but that's sort of irrelevant. But the corn, I mean, this is like almost exactly a year ago today, playing out here not too far away from church. The corn was like 8 feet tall. You remember that? And this year I don't know, I've hardly seen anywhere where it's even out of the ground. And this is one of these things, everybody keeps using the term unprecedented. Here is another one where they used unprecedented. This comes from the Guardian Weekly. This concerns the swine flu crisis in China. Well, it's not really in China now, it's all over Asia. China had the largest number of pigs in the world. They're killing them by the thousands, hundreds of thousands because of the swine flu, which there is no cure for it. And it's being referred to in this article, you'll see here on the right-hand side, it says pig Ebola. Because the pigs, they essentially get it and they hemorrhage to death and die. And because of networks and that type of thing, Vietnam now has a problem. Here's what the article in The Guardian says. Southeast Asia is battling and contain the spread of highly contagious African swine fever known as pig Ebola, which has already led to the culling, that's a nice way of saying slaughtering and killing, of millions of pigs in China and Vietnam. Vietnam has culled 2 million pigs as African swine fever spreads across the country. African swine fever, which is harmless to humans but fatal to pigs, was discovered in China in August, where it has caused havoc, leading to more than 1.2 million pigs being culled. In some reports that I've seen, China says, well, we'll eventually have to kill up to a third of our pigs, and some say that as many as half of them have already been killed because of this. There's no vaccination for the African swine flu, which causes pigs to internally hemorrhage until they die. So the only option to contain the disease is to kill contaminated animals. Some estimates in China say that up to 200 million animals may eventually be slaughtered. The virus can last for several weeks on anything from clothes to vehicles, enabling its transmission across long distances. It has spread like wildfire across Asia, causing growing devastation to the pig farmers of Vietnam and Cambodia, and putting Thailand, Asia's second biggest pork producer, on red alert. Cases have increased in Mongolia, North Korea, and Hong Kong in recent weeks, while South Korea is blood testing pigs at the border. It's interesting. When it's an animal, we'll test for it, but when it's, oh, never mind. You know what I'm referring to. And there's concerns now that people are coming across the border that have gotten there from Congo and other places where human Ebola is on the march. And I don't even have any graphics on that, but it's maybe soon will be the worst Ebola outbreak in history. It's what? Unprecedented. Listen to what this one scientist says. Dirk Pfeiffer, veterinary epidemiologist at City University of Hong Kong and an expert on African swine fever. He says this: "This is the biggest animal disease outbreak we've ever had on the planet. It makes the the foot and mouth disease and a bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, outbreaks that's mad cow disease, outbreaks pale in comparison to the damage that is being done, and we have no way to stop it from spreading. The world and Vietnam have never faced such an extremely dangerous, difficult, complicated, and expensive epidemic as this," said Vietnam's Minister of Agriculture. So this is a huge problem, and we know in Revelation there are things described in the seals about a famine, about a loaf of bread costing a day's wages. And I'm just saying this, that, with this convergence of all this, I hate to say it, bad news about agriculture and food, we may be on the cusp of that. I mentioned last week, Russia is having severe economic problem because somehow its oil has gotten contaminated and it's being refused by a lot of refineries. And that has a ripple effect. The refineries don't process the oil because they don't make money. If they process the oil, their equipment breaks down, so they can't process the oil. And if they shut down, then the people that work at the it's just this cascading effect that all of these things have, and they all seem to be happening at the same time. Now, I looked for, and I could not find the video that I had, but I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or someplace. This is from the front page the other day of the Washington Post. "Scramble is on to detect and stop deepfake videos. AI experts fear seamless fabrications will become a devastating political tool." So in a world where we live with what is termed fake news, I guess what we're going to have pretty soon is deepfake news. And one video that someone sent me, and I wish I could find it, it was a video of all the different presidents of the United States singing along to, I know why I decided not to do it, because it's that ridiculously stupid song by John Lennon, Imagine. But it was all the presidents lip singing to that song, and their mouths were moving in perfect time with the sound of the music and the words. And you could not tell, I am telling you, you could not tell that it was fake. I mean, you could you knew it was, you would think, well, yeah, that's fake, because would Reagan sing that just like Barack Obama sings it? Because Barack Obama kind of believes it. And I hope Reagan didn't. Maybe he did, I don't know. But so now this is coming into the political realm. And if you think election cycles have been bad before, listen, do you think there are people in politics that would use this technology? Do you think there are people that to slander Christian preachers would do something like this? I have no idea what's going to happen, folks. I'm just telling you, so when I say, did you see this? I should say, did you see this? Well, you really need to see this. because you need to understand what's coming. And there's never been a time where you need to guard your mind and your heart more than you do right now. Now, I've mentioned this before. There was a prestigious, a very well put together Christian legal conference put together down in Australia to discuss attacks on religious freedom. Could somebody get me a bottle of water, please? There's some here, but I fear they've been contaminated by the senior pastor. Thank you. Okay. And can you put it up? You just put a link to it. Brian will put a link to that video because I don't want to desecrate our new church building with that ridiculously moronic song of John Lennon's. It's a very lovely melody, but when you listen to the words, it's like, well, you knew who he was working for. So, in any event, this conference was going to be held in Australia, talking about attacks on religious freedom and religious liberty. Facebook has effectively blocked all advertising and mentions of that in Facebook posts. Now, it's interesting because we have a pretty active Facebook presence through the Prophecy Update and other things here at church. And I'm constantly getting ads or requests from Facebook, would you please advertise? So if anybody from Facebook is listening, and I know you are listening, don't send me these ads, because why do I see you deplatforming good, solid people all the time? Why would I pay money to build an audience and then have you deplatform me, which in my view, because the way they do it, it's essentially, I personally believe it's slanderous or libelous the way they do it. They're saying you're a hate person or a hate monger when you're really not. And you're not allowed to lie about other people. When you lie about other people, things can happen. Look at where this is going. Here is some resolutions that were one of the resolutions that was presented to the California Democratic Party at its recent convention. Now, stuff is about 200 pages. I read through about 75 and had to go, wash my brain out. This is every left-wing nut job thing you have ever heard of that they're proposing in the California Democratic Party. If you ever want to make a case for the Electoral College, go read this stuff, because you do not want California to have any more influence in presidential elections than it already does. And there are a lot of good people in California. It's just that they're not the majority anymore. So look at this: defining anti-Semitism and defending First Amendment rights. So we are in favor of the First Amendment. And by the way, this is a rewrite, as it says at the top. So they've reworked this. I don't know what it looked like before, but look down here. Just look at what it says. First paragraph, whereas there's been heated discussion over what constitutes anti-Semitism and the boundaries of criticism of Israel in the context of legislation and statements of public officials. And there has been a heated discussion. Why? Because Democrats say a lot of really anti-Semitic things about Israel in particular. So, and here's what it says at the bottom. Whereas protecting First Amendment rights is critical, but is also limited to exclude hate speech, using the concept that offending statements first should be viewed through the lens of the party experiencing the hate, and that Jews, Latinx, African American, Asian Pacific Islander, Muslims, disabilities, and LGBTI communities can be targets of oppression and hate speech for a variety of reasons. So what does that mean? You cannot criticize any of those groups for what they do. Because if you do, that's hate speech, and that's not protected by the First Amendment. And I would suggest to you that if you don't protect that type of speech, you don't protect speech at all. And the American Civil Liberties Union used to stand up for people who were hate speeches. Remember the Skokie demonstrations back in when was that? Back in the 80s, probably, when the Nazis wanted to demonstrate in a community, neo-Nazis wanted to demonstrate in a community that was started largely, or had a large population of Holocaust survivors or their children. But I think that sometimes the physical world mimics what's going on in the spiritual world and the geopolitics and all of that other thing. And so this is what happened this week. Up around Cleveland, there was an earthquake, 4.2. And it's not unusual. Back in the 80s, I think it was, there was an earthquake. If you remember, I think it was about 5.0 that was a little bit east of Cleveland along the lake at Madison. And the reason why that one was significant is because what's there at Madison on Lake Erie? A nuclear power plant. I remember, it wasn't too many years ago, I was driving from Cleveland to Toledo, and I chose the highway known as the construction zone known as the Ohio Turnpike. Has anybody ever seen all the lanes open on that thing? I mean, so I was in a construction zone where they had it from the 3 lanes that they lead you to believe you're going to get to drive in, but really there's only maybe part of one. And so there was a traffic jam, and I'm sitting there in my car, and my car starts bouncing. This is about almost halfway, it was around Fremont. And so I turned on the radio or checked, and lo and behold, there was about a 4.2 or so earthquake. And I've been in earthquakes that size, maybe up to about a 5.2 or 5.3 when I've been in California. This is an interesting graphic that someone did. Starting in 1900, what they do is every second represents a year, and these are all magnitude 7, 8, or 9 earthquakes that have taken place around the world. So this will take about a minute and a half to go through. But you see these reports of earthquakes, and if it's like 2.5 or 3, I don't really consider that much significant about it. But you get up, you start getting up into 4.5, 5. You're starting to get potentially some damage in that type of thing. But the extraordinary thing is, you'll see as this graphic goes, there have been a lot of these things in the last 120 years. And there's literally been, so we're up to 1950. So look at, sort of capture in your mind what it was in 1950, or now 57, 58, 60, and see how it's going to compare when we get up to today. I think this goes up through about 2017 or 2018. But Jesus said that in the last days there would be earthquakes in diverse places. They're in many different places. And now these are the major ones. And you can see there's a major fault line that goes down the mid-ocean ridge there in the Atlantic. But now as we get up to 1990, you remember what it looked like back about 1950 in South America, in the Pacific Rim? And these are 7, 8, 9 earthquakes. Okay, that was from 1900 to 2000. And I would tell you that if you put from 2000 to 2020 on there, it would be even more filled in. So this is, there's always a lot of controversy. Oh, this isn't true. They're making it. Oh, we just were able to detect things more. Look, I've paid attention to the news a long time. I remember the really bad earthquake, what was it, about a 9.1 or 9.2 in Anchorage, Alaska, back on Good Friday, 1964. I'm just telling you from what my perspective and people that I know that follow this much more closely, there's a lot of earthquakes happening. Speaking of earthquakes, though, wonderful Oberlin College up in Oberlin, Ohio, near Lorain, Elyria. It's a left-wing seminary, and they indoctrinate kids, and they charge you about, I think the current tuition is about $70,000 a year. Now, some conservative people have gone to Oberlin. Michelle Malkin, she graduated from Oberlin. She's an alumna, excuse me. And they had this thing called Office of Equity Concerns. And this is why college is so expensive. When we look at student loan problems, it's because they have all these people who these administrators who don't really do that much. But Oberlin had a bit of an earthquake this week. Back at the day after the election, the day of the election or the election eve in 2016, a young African-American man was in Gibson's Bakery in Oberlin, and he shoplifted a couple bottles of wine. He was like, I was going to steal two and pay for one, didn't pay for any. The owner of one of the store owners went to detain him. The guy started beating him up, and when the guy, he was like, I'm going to kill you. Not the store owner, but he was going to kill the store owner. The store owner wasn't doing this. And so he was arrested. And so what happened? Well, Oberlin facilitated their students doing a lot of protests. And it was very damaging to the Gibson Brothers Bakery business. They filed a lawsuit claiming that they had been slandered, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And it went to a jury recently in Lorain County. And the jury came back and said total damages for the Gibsons, including the man who was injured, $11 million. And then they had a hearing on punitive damages, and they gave them an additional $33 million for a total award of $44 million. So that is, so the college president responded to this, put out a letter to the email, and he says that they're not going to get this. They're not going to get this. And I have to be careful because I've done work with the firm that represented Oberlin. And it's a great law firm. But even the editorials today are, well, maybe Oberlin, there's a little bit of animus in the community because the kids are a little bit snobbish and that type of thing. And let me tell you, that's exactly what's going on here. Oberlin's getting back what they dish out to people. They've tried to destroy Gibson Brothers, who had a contract for many years with Oberlin to supply baked goods. But that doesn't matter in the world, in the political left. If you do something that we deem inappropriate, we are going to destroy you. So, by the way, Oberlin has an endowment fund of just under $1 billion. And so the president saying, oh, we could never afford this is just, frankly, a big fat lie. Now, I don't think the award will be affirmed by the courts at that level, but I think that under the circumstances, the jury tried it. Very hard to overturn a jury verdict. And I think that the jury was sending a message to Oberlin and those people. So listen, this is only a picture of this great ideological divide that we have. Here's another example of the ideological divide. And I love the way they titled this. In Illinois, they enacted, you see it on the right, the Reproductive Health Act. It was signed into law by Governor Jay Pritzker, Democrat. I believe he comes from the Pritzker family, which I think own the Hyatt hotel chain or does. And headlines, governor signs Roe versus Wade firewall. Abortion is now a fundamental right in Illinois. And look at some of the things that they did in this act. They repealed the Illinois abortion law of 1975 and the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act was repealed. So there was a law in 1995 that was enacted in Illinois saying you cannot do partial birth abortion. It's a barbaric thing. The Illinois legislature banned it or overturned that law. So now there's no law against it in Illinois. So let me make a prediction. States like California, New York, Illinois, which have enacted these radical laws in favor of abortion, are going to have a problem. And I predict this is probably one of the worst acts anywhere in the country. And I predict, so what happens when you allow this unrestricted abortion? What do you end up with less of? Children, right? People. And so in countries, we've talked about the demographic problem. In fact, Foreign Affairs magazine. Now, this is from the Council on Foreign Relations, and I know they're globalists and everything, but they make a very good point in an article in the new journal issue, which just came out yesterday. And it talks about demographics are going to change the world. So right now we live in a world where there are really two superpowers, if you will, United States and China. And then Russia is also influential because of their military technology and prowess. But and they said, listen, anybody who thinks the United States is just going to go away because this China is going to grow like crazy does not understand demographics. China is going to grow for another probably half a decade, and then it's going to go in a steep decline. Why? Because they were forcing abortions on women. They had less children. When you have less children, what happens? Your population age goes off the charts like this. And so now in China, you have 2 workers, and Japan's, I think, even worse. You have less than 2 workers to support 1 retiree. The economics don't work. So my prediction is that the people who want the states to allow this to be done will be the first to fail financially because of their messed up demographics. And it's sort of like, that's justice. You're getting what you deserve in some way. But these will cause economic earthquakes. And so we have them across the United States. We have New York, Illinois, California. These places are going to be financial economic disasters. They have promised pensions that you cannot fill. Average state worker, if you were going to invest money today to pay off a retired state worker's pension and benefits in California, do you know how much money you would have to put into the bank today or into an investment? $2 million per worker. It does not work. But they'll limp along. And so the demographics are China population decline, Russia's probably even worse, Europe's in really bad shape. Japan, forget. There's no way to turn it around. And nobody's wanting to have babies. I've cited this statistic. They sell more adult diapers in Japan than they do baby diapers, and have for quite some time now. But there's always a little glimmer of hope. I want to give this young lady, she's 12 or 13 years old. This was her little speech about abortion. And look, this abortion thing is seeping into all the city councils, local governments, and that type of thing. So she had the floor. I want you to listen to what she said about abortion and, more importantly, the reaction to her.
In Jeremiah 1:5, it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." God says babies are alive in the womb. Some people say that abortion should be the mom's choice. It's her body. But what about the baby's choice? The baby's body is in the mom's body. Abortion reminds me of slavery. Owners said that their slaves were their property and they could do whatever they wanted with them. Just how moms say about their babies. My hope is that in a few years we'll look back at abortion and think, that was so cruel. I can't believe we did that. Just how we all look back at slavery. The question is, who will you be? The slave owner, the man nailing the whites only sign on the water fountain, Rosa Parks, or Abraham Lincoln? Who are you going to be? Make a choice. My choice is made. I'm here today standing up for what's right. I'm here today speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. Are you choosing to be like the plantation worker flogging the little black child? Or are you going to protest even if it costs your life like Martin Luther King Jr.? Who are you going to be? If you think abortion should be illegal, would you please stand up? We need to change the law to change the... Order. If you think abortion should be illegal, would you please stand up? We need to change the law to change the world, so let's stand up and do it. Thank you.
Order.
Now, they were not applauding her in that room. They're yelling at her. When I hear these reactions like this, you have to wonder. It's like,
sir, please sit down. I asked.
And so this goes on for another minute or so. So this week in the New York Times and other magazines, there's a full-page ad called "Don't Ban Equality. It's time for companies to stand up for reproductive health care." Now, this is where corporations are. Okay, all these big corporations. There's a huge list. You can look it up online. You can download the list of signatories to it. But look at what they said. This was in the New York Times last Monday. It's time for companies to stand up for reproductive health care. Look at what it says here. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health, independence, and economic stability of our employees and customers. Now, how much product do aborted babies buy? This is... Anyway, here's a quote. This is from the thing. Simply put, it goes against our values and is bad for business. It impairs our ability to build diverse and inclusive workforce pipelines, recruit top talent across the states, and protect the well-being of all the people who keep our businesses thriving day in and day out. So this is where political correct. This is where fascism goes into the companies. You see it with Facebook. What they're doing. There was a report in Breitbart this week about how Facebook has a way to build a case that someone is a hater. And because of different apps that you have on your phone, they pick up data from those apps, even though you have your phone off. The phone is listening. And so this is where it's going. This is another one. This is an excellent article in National Review called Desmond is Amazing, Needs Saving. And let me see if I can pull this up here. Well, with regard to that National Review, and I can't remember who wrote this, here's a response to that equality thing from the CEOs. Has it not occurred to these business leaders that unborn children will grow up to buy their products or work for their companies? Clarity of thought and expression about moral issues is not a core competency of CEOs. The statement is a festival of absurdity and euphemism, an exercise in perverse virtue signaling to a progressive audience that believes that maintaining one of the most permissive pro-abortion regimes in the developed world is a virtue. Anyway, and it says nobody's required for this. I'm not sure if I see my... Well, I can summarize this article on Desmond is Amazing, Needs Saving. Look, pray for this young man. I think he's being subject of child abuse. His parents have taken him into gay bars, had him dance. They throw dollars at him. He's like 9 or 10 or 11 years old. I saw a video of him at a pride parade. I can't even play what it was. And it breaks my heart. You know, the only hope for this young man is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think imprisoning the people that are pushing him this way. Here is this is a little sound on this video.
Picture behind him of a boy that said Rohypnol, and he's also appeared in gay clubs with having older gay men throwing money at him. And I wondered what you thought about this normalisation of child abuse.
Okay, so what was happening here was this is a forum that took place on transgenderism in England. And one of the ladies, she had tweeted this, and I believe she's the one who was asking the question. She was asking about this Desmond. They take him to a gay bar and they throw dollars at him because he's dancing in a sexually suggestive way. Is this not sexual abuse? And what did the crowd do? They did the same thing they did to that little 12-year-old girl in Raleigh, North Carolina. They yelled at her. and her other question was, and this tweet here is, the NSPCC is an organization that promotes transgenderism and that type of thing. And they had hired a model. You see her on the stage there. And she had posed for Playboy. And so the question was asked, can you explain why a children's safeguarding charity has hired a porn model as a child line ambassador? It's an astonishing decision. Is it worth the canceled direct debits? In other words, you hired a porn model, a transgender porn model, as an ambassador because you claim to protect children. The world is so messed up. And so they did terminate this person as an ambassador. And now they're the subject of a firestorm of hate like you've never seen. You got to read through their Twitter account. How dare you? How dare you go against trans people like this? It's insane. But look, even the Vatican, you got to give them credit. They came out this week and rejected the concept of gender fluidity. So give credit where credit is due. Even though the Pope is a crazy left-wing communist, at least this statement was correct. So you have to. And so this week, this is front page of the Jerusalem Post this morning, the Pride Parade in Tel Aviv. 250,000 people. People came from all over the world. Tel Aviv touts itself as a gay-friendly city. Here in Columbus, I'm told, what's the attendance that I heard? 500,000 people? And then on the right-hand side, if you can screw over to the right-hand side, you see the U.S., not the embassy building any longer, it's a consulate office in Tel Aviv with the gay pride flag. Even though the president and Secretary of State said, don't do this, which sort of leads you to believe that maybe there are people working in the State Department and other departments in our government that might not be on the same page as others in the executive branch. I'm just guessing that it might be the case. In fact, the report this morning is that the current director of the FBI is refusing to cooperate with Congress in the investigation that Attorney General Barr has ordered into what happened with the surveillance of the Trump campaign. So look, fire them. Just fire them, President Trump. Get rid of these people. So I don't know. It's a very complicated situation. This article in the New York Times front page, questioning faith and loyalties in abuse cases about sexual abuse that has taken place within the Southern Baptist Convention. And look, this is true in every organization where there are children and others involved, and men and women. That's not to condone it. But it's having been involved in investigating these, I know that it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to get people to testify. Everybody wants the churches to get up and castigate these people from the pulpit, but they have rights. The accused have rights. So if you think abuse is taking place, call the cops. Let the police take care of it. That's the way the system is supposed to work in our country. So, but this is a huge problem. Now, Jonathan Merritt is a son of a former head of the SBC. He's an emergent church writer, postmodern. He writes for The Atlantic, Religious News Service, other organizations. And he tweeted this the other day. If your views about God, faith, and the Bible are so deeply etched in stone that you are incapable of evolving even when you're presented with new information and insight, your theology is actually theolatry. That's an insane statement. And yet he is touted among a lot. Ed Stetzer sits down with him. I showed you the video where he said someday in the church, what? Homosexuality will be seen as a crown to celebrate. I've played the video for you. Go look it up online. Jonathan Merritt, Crown Homosexuality on YouTube, and you'll find it. And the people sat there and just sort of like, and it's like, what does somebody say? Would somebody just please say something? Stop. And In some cases, you have to stop being nice and you have to tell the truth, because you speak the truth in love, but sometimes that's pretty harsh. Luke Moon, who I met at, he's a solid guy. He was one of the ones who was sort of undercover at the Crisis at the Checkpoint Conference in Oklahoma City last October, responded to Jonathan Merritt this way, and I thought this was the best one that I saw. It's weird how your theology consistently evolves to the point where it's indistinguishable from whatever the world loves at a given moment. How far has he gone? This was a tweet. The tweet I gave you was just above this tweet. Came after this tweet. To all who are celebrating Pride, I wish you joy, grace, peace, and safety. May you find the courage to share your stories and know that your life is worth celebrating. And then when the SBC came out and they adopted a resolution this week on sexuality, and they also adopted some resolutions that are just, it's Marxism that the SBC adopted these resolutions at their convention this week in Birmingham, Alabama. And so he said this, similar to what he said in that video that you can look up. Predictions, 20 years from now, Southern Baptists will apologize to the LGBTQ community just as they did to Black Americans for their support of slavery and segregation in 1995. And this was in response to someone's tweet that had said, boy, I don't like where this SBC resolution on sexuality and personal identity went. And it's very wishy-washy. I've played you clips of the Revoice people, and I'm just telling you folks, it's remnant time. They're falling like flies. Now, we knew that this was coming. We've talked about the end times apostasy. We know that it will increase. And my contention has been that it's sort of like a barrel. The apostasy barrel fills up, and eventually it gets to the point where it tips over and it causes a lot of damage. It's like a flood. In our dorm in college, now I never participated in this. Okay, I just want you to be clear. Although I found it kind of humorous. They would take the giant trash cans out of the restrooms in the guys' dorm, and we had tile floors, and they would fill it all the way up. They would lean it against the door and then knock, and the person would open the door, and the can would fall over, and it looked like a small tsunami went through their room. That's what I think of when I think of the apostasy bucket. At some point, it gets so full it tips over, and it's like a tsunami. And everybody says it can get worse, and I'm not sure. Jesus said it would be as in the days of Lot, and I'm like, I don't know that Lot had to put up with all this. Pretty bad, but it's shoved in your face all the time now. And I mentioned this last week. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did which was right in his own eyes. Now, are these not things that are going on today? Jesus, Luke 18, I tell you that when he will avenge them speedily, nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? To which I answered the question last week. If he doesn't hurry up, maybe not. So Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, I'm not going to read through the entire passage, but I think it's a perfect response to Jonathan Merritt, who says, well, your faith has to evolve and change based on modern information. This is not theologically correct in the least. And it says, and all were baptized, verse 2, unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all did eat the same spiritual meat, and all did drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. And Paul then goes on to talk about how the children of Israel are examples for us of what we need to avoid as Christians. Now, these things were our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolatrous, as were some of them, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 3,000 and 20,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. It is hard for me to conceive of a better practical application of someone who needs to heed this message than that person who wrote that tweet that I just shared with you. Now, that's not to say he's the worst. We're all sinners. But goodness. There's a great chart on the kings of Israel and Judah. The northern kingdom never had a single good king in its history. It fell in 722 BC under the assault of the Assyrian Empire. The town of Samaria withstood the onslaught for 3 years, but eventually it fell. And I've been there, and you can see why it took them 3 years to overtake that. The southern kingdom did have some good kings. Manasseh was probably the most evil. He was preceded Josiah. Manasseh did repent near the end of his life. And he had the longest, I think he reigned for 55 years, the longest reign of any of the kings of either United Kingdom, Northern Kingdom, or the Kingdom of Judah. And Josiah, and I told you last week, Josiah, they were in the temple. The temple was falling apart. They're bringing in people to repair it, and they found this scroll. And at first, I think the reaction was, what is that anyway? It was the book of the law in the temple. So the physical falling apart of the temple was a manifestation of the spiritual falling apart that was going on in Israel at the time. And so he brings the book of the law in, they read from it, and it says this, and the king sent, 2 Kings 23, this is the chapter I don't think I shared with you last week. And the king sent, and they gathered unto him all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and all the priests and the prophets and all the people, both small and great, and he read in their ears all of the words of the book of the covenant which was found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people stood to the covenant. Interesting, that young lady in Raleigh. Would you stand with me against this? Verse 4, 2 Kings 23, and the king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord, all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, and for all the hosts of heaven, and he burned them without Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. And he put down the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the high places round about Jerusalem, them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the host of heaven. And he put down, whoops, that's the same verse. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places came not up to the altar of the Lord at Jerusalem, but they did eat of the unleavened bread among their brethren. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. And this is what had happened. They were sacrificing their children. Oh boy, they were really bad. I mean, we would never allow that to happen in America or in the civilized world. Oh, really? We do it in secret. It's probably even worse. I saw a video this morning of a guy. He was shown a video of an abortion. And his reaction was, oh man, what? There's 10 toes, fingers, legs. That's a baby. I didn't know they did that. Josiah, and he brake in pieces the images and cut down the groves and filled their places with the bones of men. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel descend, had made, both the altar and the high place he brake down and burned the high place and stamped it to small powder and burned the grove. Josiah took care of business. This nonsense that we have to evolve in our faith. Jesus said this in Matthew 7, therefore whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. I was watching the U.S. Open yesterday at Pebble Beach. Beautiful place. And along the beach there are big rocks. You're not going to move them. They're not going to evolve. They're not going to go away while you're watching. And Jesus says, if you're not, that's the wise man builds his house on a rock, but the foolish man builds his house on a sand, because when the rains come, it just washes away. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And so the church really needs to learn these lessons. Again, we need to be reminded of this all the time. And this evolving faith thing it's not a faith at all. It's a faith in yourself. It's idolatry, self-idolatry. That's what it is. So, good lessons. Now let's look at a little bit in the Middle East. Last week I shared with you Ambassador Friedman had made some remarks that, Israel could annex the West Bank, parts of the West Bank, some but not all. There's a lot of things going on in the Middle East. This is from the Washington Post last week. In Iraq and Syria, truly scorched earth. What ISIS is doing, ISIS cells that are still existing there, they're going through and they're burning the crops. What result does that happen? Well, that causes lack of food. People can't eat. They move. That's the desire that they've had. This whole thing that's been going on in Syria is a desire to get people to move. It was a cleansing of Sunni Islamic people from Syria so the Shias could take over. And there's so much evidence that this is what's going on, and it still continues. It's just, it's astonishing. There are airstrikes up in Idlib province right now. It is there's been reports of barrel bombing of neighborhoods in Idlib, and people are leaving. They're going into Turkey. It's as bad as any other things like this that have happened during the Syrian civil war, and you just don't hear that much about it. This is another problem that's kind of coming up is China corn and caterpillars. They're having a problem with their corn crop because of worms, caterpillars. That's another thing that impacts food. This is a thing that's a lot of people don't talk about. This is some maps of Iran. You see the Caspian Sea there to the north, the Persian Gulf to the south. The dark red areas are extreme drought. Red is severe drought, and any color that's sort of red is abnormally dry to extreme drought. Major lakes in Iran have essentially disappeared. It's a big problem. This is going to be kind of jumbled because I just was throwing slides in. Let me see here. Oh, so there's a lesson to be learned for Iran, because with the drought, what's happening? And the article, and now I'm trying to remember where I read the article, Geopolitical Futures, I believe, maybe Stratfor. Listen to what it says, because here's what happened in Syria. Syria had several years of extreme drought, starting around 2008. The Syrian civil war started in March 2011 in southern Syria. Part of that was because it was protest by people. They were hungry, they were unemployed, and we see the results of that. So what these people are saying is, listen, Iran, you know, you're in Syria right now. You know what's going on. And now you have ISIS burning crops. You're in the midst of a severe drought. The Iranian government, this article says, in trying to understand the net political effect of internal migration, might do well to look to Syria. The regime of Hafez Assad, who led Syria from 1971 to 2000, also instituted food self-sufficiency policies encouraging agricultural production by providing fuel subsidies to make it easier for farmers to access groundwater. This led to a substantial decline in Syria's groundwater resources, making rural communities more vulnerable to inevitable droughts. When Hafez's son, when Daddy Assad died and baby Assad, Bashar Assad, came to power, he implemented a number of liberalization measures to reform the Syrian economy. Among other goals of these reforms, Bashar hoped to end his father's fuel subsidies, in part to curb overexploitation of groundwater. That's all well and good, but then drought struck. Between 2007 and 2010, Syria experienced its worst drought in recorded history. 2008 was the driest year on record. It decimated production of small and medium-scale farmers. Many livestock herds were completely destroyed. Assad's government, however, kept its reform policies in place, exacerbating farmers' lack of access to water. And so what they're saying is, listen, Iran, you're going to be kind of in the same problem. So Iran has proposed taking water from the Caspian Sea. Well, guess what? Russia borders on that. Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and they're saying, wait, this is our lake. It's called Caspian Sea. It's really a big lake. And there's also some reports this week that I think Zero Hedge had an article this morning about it's oil rich. There's a lot of oil and gas there. And Iran is really getting, it's causing some conflict with Russia. Because what Russia did was when Russia used to control all the land other than Azerbaijan and Iran around the Caspian Sea. But then what happened? 1989, 1991, the Soviet Union broke up, and the Stan republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, they broke off. So now Russia says, okay, well, let's divide up the oil resources. We have 5 countries, so we'll do it 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20% to each. And Iran's going, wait a minute, you used to have, it should be 50-50, because it used to be one country in Azerbaijan, but it used to be just really 2 countries, so let's do it 50-50. And there's a report at Zero Hedge, go look it up today, talking about how this is, it's a problem that's growing. There's conflict everywhere you look. Here, I've seen a bunch of articles in the press this week, over the last 2 weeks. Here's one: Israel's religious secular rift evident in politics on streets. And so people are looking at this and they're saying, what is going on? I mean, the Orthodox Jews, the Haredim, they have an outsized political influence. They're probably only 10% of the population, but they seem to get everything that they want. And so there's this conflict between, believe me, the people who are supporting the gay pride parade in Tel Aviv and the ultra-Orthodox. There's a lot of conflict in Israeli society. It's not too dissimilar from the conflict that you're seeing growing here. So just pay attention to that, and I'll have more to say about that in the future. This was an article from last week in the Jerusalem Post, a new mosque on the Temple Mount, below where Israel's, attacking some bases up in Syria, and I think they attacked some. There were some words of explosions heard around Damascus last night that usually is an indication that somebody's bombing you or sending missiles in there to take out things. But there was also this thing on the new mosque on the Temple Mount. Remember I talked about this a couple months ago, the area around the Eastern Gate, the closed gate, the Gate of Mercy. There's a room there that's been essentially turned into a mosque by the Muslims. That makes 5 mosques now that are on the Temple Mount. And what happened on Quds Day, which was started by Iran, was there were essentially, there was a lot of conflict on the Temple Mount. This was the day that Iran has set up for all Muslims to say, we're going to go back and take over Jerusalem. Well, what happened in Jerusalem that day was they actually let Orthodox Jewish settler group go, a fairly large group, go up on the Temple Mount. It's not open for worship up there. I mean, when you go up there, they say, don't hold your wife's hand. Don't even look like you're praying. Don't bow your head and move your lips. They will eject you because there's no freedom of worship there. So this is something that we see going on. So here are some pictures. This is Quds Day at the Temple Mount, several 100,000. Quds Day, Rouhani in Tehran. Here are some of the pictures. This is from a street in Iran. So what do you see there on the ground? So they walk over it. They trample on it. This has a huge significance in the Middle East. It's an Israeli flag. And there were the usual calls that we're going to destroy Israel. Here was a poster that was in the one of the parades in Tehran. So this is, there was a proclamation that was enacted. This is, and I tried to clean up the translation. It was published in Farsi, which is way down the list of my understood languages. English, I'm still working on English. But here's this was the proclamation issued. Listen to what this says. Over the course of 40 years, this happened back in 1979. What happened in 1979? The Iranian Revolution, 40 years later. Over the course of 40 years, the initiative, the miraculous type of the late Imam, continues to convey the freedom of Quds al-Sharif to release the oppressed and defenseless people from the clutches of the Zionist occupation and to eliminate the cancerous gland of Israel as the ultimate goal of the Islamic world. Now, I know that's a compound sentence. I know enough English to know that. And they really do it. And to seriously confront the ill-fated plans of the foolish president and the American government body against Islamic countries in the vulgar conspiracy called the deal of the century. The commitment of the reactionary heads of some Arab countries in an effort to normalize relations with the false regime and the usurpers of the first Qibla, Muslim, we condemn the seemingly Zionist American Economic Summit coming up in Bahrain at the end of the month. So the big news this week, well, here's, again, I'm just sort of throwing this out here. This is an article from Foreign Policy. Leaked documents reveal Russian effort to exert influence in Africa. Why is Africa important? Africa has a lot of what we call rare earth elements. I guess it was from The Guardian, excuse me. And a lot of things that we need for modern technology. There was an article in Foreign Policy about how China has essentially, and I'll show these in a future update, cornered the market on these rare earth elements. They control up to 94, 95% of some of the things that you need, for example, lithium and that type of thing that you need to have a cell phone. Now, they're not so good at making chips. They haven't really developed our technology yet, but we see the riots going on and demonstrations in Hong Kong about China becoming a really overbearing surveillance society. So here's the big news of the week, and we'll finish up with this. A couple of tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Now, there's if you want a good summary, by the way, go to Jerusalem Post, click on Seth Fransman, or go to sethfransman.com website. He has a bunch of articles on there, maybe Middle East Research Center. Just Seth Fransman, Gulf of Oman timeline, and you will find excellent timelines of what he's done. So there's all this, finger pointing. It was Israel. No, it was the United States. We know that Iran has a bunch of submarines. There's a picture of them. Here's a drawing that Seth did, showing where the tankers were. They had gone through the Straits of Hormuz. They were out into this more of open ocean there in the Gulf of Oman when they were attacked. And here's some footage that you can see. And then here is Mike Pence's. So you see the footage in the one up in the paper, and then you can see here my Secretary of State Mike Pompeo giving the United States conclusion as to who was behind the attacks.
The Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. This is only the latest in a series of attacks instigated by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its surrogates against American and allied interests.
So who did this? I mean, that's the big question that everybody's asking. Was it the United States? Was it the Mossad? Israel did it? United States or Israel trying to cause a war? Iran, why would Iran? And I heard people, oh, it's a false flag. It's not a false flag. So here's my conclusion. I read a lot of information on this week. I think one thing I only saw a couple people raise that I think is something that they've missed entirely. I heard people saying, it's not rational for Iran to do this. Why would they do this? And that I heard somebody say the A plus to the person who shouted out there. Don't do it all the time though. Who shouted out, Iran is not rational. They are governed by mullahs. So listen, I wrote to somebody in the Middle East last night who was with Iranians, not in a different country. And I asked him, I said, would there be a religious motivation for the mullahs of Iran to have done this, to have planted these bombs? And you can see from the video, this is a video released by the U.S. Navy here. I embedded in the Gulf News newspaper. And it shows Iranian Navy boat taking a magnetic mine off of one of the boats. And here on the Arab News this morning, you see a mine stuck to the side of one of these tankers. So my conclusion is it's probably, and even though Iran comes out and says, oh, we would never do this, they were having a meeting with the head of the Japanese prime minister when this attack occurred. Seth has done some excellent work. His report this morning in the Jerusalem Post was, look, there are now reports surfacing that there was an American drone or two that were shadowing the tankers to make sure nothing went wrong. A missile was fired at that from, it's believed, Iranian boats. They then, and I believe one of the drones might have been shot down. The Iranians were then, and they're saying, oh, we went to rescue them. And no, all the evidence that I've seen shows that they went to remove mines that might not have yet been exploded. And it may have been that they were trying to show, look how great we are. This mine thing happened. We rescued the crew of these vessels, and look how great we are. But listen, they have a apocalyptic theology behind the leaders of Iran. And so it doesn't seem rational to us, but it's perfectly rational to them based on their religious belief that by creating this conflict, they can bring about the coming of the 12th of Man, the Mahdi. This theology has not gone away. Now, I don't think it's the majority of people in Iran that hold to this, but the people in charge do. So that's what you have to look at, is what do the people in charge believe? And Iran's having a lot of economic problems. This is from the Arab News just yesterday. Iran oil output at its lowest since the 1980s. So it's a thing. This is Seth Fransman's article from the Jerusalem Post. Look at what he says here. In addition, this is the second paragraph. In addition, they likely hoped the ship would sink with the evidence aboard, including the unexploded mine. The planners may have been involved in the May 12th incident, and Iran's been saying we're going to shut down shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. And so I think when people say they're going to do something, you got to believe like maybe they're going to do it. In the May 12th incidents, when 4 boats were sabotaged off the coast of UAE in the same general area, in each incident, the planner was careful to avoid casualties. For instance, aboard the Altair, one of the ships that was attacked this week, which was badly damaged and set afire, it appears the crew was not injured. On the Kokuka, which was barely damaged, drones may have been used to harass the ship first. Was the Kokuka, a Japanese-owned ship, attacked on purpose because of Abe's visit or by mistake? The Iranians didn't stop trying to get hold of both ships until June 14th. An Iranian tugboat reportedly approached the Kokuka and even wanted to push it back towards Iranian waters before the Bain Bridge, I think that's a U.S. vessel, interceded. The behavior of Iran from start to finish appears suspicious, not working with the various navies and boats involved, but trying to steer the incident into its own control. And as I said, Seth has done yeoman's work this week on his articles, his timelines, the graphics. Just if you want to understand what's going on, it's been as complete as any assessment I've seen from anyone, anywhere in the world. And in addition to that, Seth in the front page this morning of the Jerusalem Post has an article, and this is something that I didn't see anywhere else. Central Asian summits that show the U.S. is losing its grip. And so what happened just Thursday and Friday, there were two major summits that took place. The first one was in Tajikistan, which is the one that you see in the video here. And you had all of the usual suspects there. You had the leader of China, you had Putin from Russia, you had the people from Bahrain, you had people from United Arab Emirates, you had Erdogan from Turkey was there, Rouhani from Iran was there, and by video feed, the Palestinian also were there. There was also another summit that took place, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO summit, took place, and here are a lot of the same players again. The guy from Tajikistan, leader of China, Russia, Putin, the 7 or 8 countries that make up the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. And they were there. A lot of the theme was, hey, we got to get behind this Iran nuclear deal. So it's that's not what I'm going to finish with. So all this stuff going on about Trump's peace plan. Is there a peace plan? What is it? What are the terms of it? Got the Bahrain summit coming up in about 10 days, 9 days now. What's going to happen? Article in the New York Times talking from one of the leaders in the Palestinian Authority that it's very hot in the West Bank. There's a crisis. They're waging financial war on us. So what's going to happen? This is a great graphic. Look, it appears, this is an article from the Wall Street Journal on Friday or Saturday. Some Palestinians give up on their own state next to Israel. Some of them are saying, look, we don't want this anymore. Let's just live in peace. And let's get some of the economic benefits, because Israel's a very prosperous country right now. And they're sitting there saying, hey, why can't we participate in that? So this poll that was published in the Wall Street Journal, that they seem to be losing interest. Support for a two-state solution on pre-1967 borders has fallen on both sides. So the ruling elite in the world, they'll say, oh, well, we need this two-state solution. Now, this is a great graphic that I found this morning, and it shows some of the practicality of the situation. When you get into Israel, of course, you see the Sea of Galilee there in the north, the Dead Sea in the south, the Mediterranean to the east, to the west, excuse me, and you see what's called the West Bank, the Judea and Samaria, biblical Judea and Samaria. It's where all these rich sites are. But what you see is between the western border of the West Bank and the Mediterranean, in places that's only 15 kilometers wide. I mean, you drive further than that to get to the freeway from our church. And the person who prepared this, he's I think he's from Azerbaijan. He does a thing called the Caspian Report. And he does, I got to find out how he does these graphics, because they're phenomenal. And he's a pretty good geopolitical analysis. And he says, listen, there's not going to be a two-state solution. Israel will never give up. Listen, what Israel wants to do is preserve Israel. And so they're going to keep that land because of the security situation. In fact, he says they have the Golan Heights. There's really no way they're going to give the Golan Heights back. And then this area in Lebanon between the northern border there of Lebanon, and you can see where, for example, over here, you can see where Dan is up there in the corner near where it says Shaba Farms and Magdal Shams. Okay, that's all part of the sort of the Golan Heights. But that border of Lebanon all the way up there to the Litani River is really very strategic land because it's high ground, it's mountainous, and you want to control that land because if you control that land, then it's very hard for people to get through that, to get down to you, to attack you. So Israel has a plain there in the middle of Israel, the valley of the Jezreel Valley there by Megiddo. So they want to protect that because armies get in there and they can cover a lot of ground, but it's hard for them to get through the mountains. So you control the mountains and the high ground, and it's harder for them to get there. So his thinking is, and I think I agree with this, that in any future event, war event, conflict, Israel may just say, okay, fine, we're done with this. We got the Golan Heights now. We're taking all the way up to the Litani River. And we'll just deal with the fallout from it because we're not going to take the security risk because we want to protect our country. And that's where Hezbollah is, and they have maybe 150, 200,000 rockets, some of which have pretty good guidance. So look, this is all I'm saying is I don't think war is imminent. I don't think war is going to happen tomorrow, but there's certainly attempts by Iran through Hezbollah and other proxies to try to get Israel. Israel, by all estimates, seems to be prepared. They've taken out a lot of the border, they say all the border tunnels between Lebanon and Israel, but they have these rockets. And if I recall for you, about 2 years ago, there was the Herzliya conference, and the head of the Israeli Air Force gave a very interesting speech. It's available on YouTube. And essentially he said, listen, if they come after us again, it'll be over in 48 to 72 hours. So, because we're ready, and it'll be pretty bloody. So let me just finish with this. This will take 2 minutes. I want you to go to Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. There's a couple of articles there. One is, why is the Palestinian Authority opposed to the upcoming economic conference in Bahrain? And then much larger paper that was done called The Real Catastrophe for the Palestinians. And it talks about it, and I've mentioned this before, it's the questions I ask of the Palestinian guy who spoke at Christ at the checkpoint. And I said, listen, you complain about how Palestinians are treated in Israel, but I see a lot of Palestinians who are benefiting economically from software technology companies and that type of thing, and they're losing interest in a two-state solution. And you complain about the refugees, but look at Yarmouk in Syria. This is a picture from about 5 years ago. Am I allowed to say hellhole? It's a hellhole. It doesn't even exist now. There were hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who lived there. It was one of the most densely populated places on the planet. This is where Arabs kept Arabs in abject poverty for 70 years. Why does nobody ever talk about this? And now they're gone. Where did they go? They're in camps elsewhere. Listen, stop talking about Israel and the Palestinians and how Israel's oppressing the Palestinians because, frankly, the evidence is overwhelming that this is taking place elsewhere. In Jordan, part of the incentives were, why don't you take in the Palestinians as citizens of Jordan, finally, after all this time? And Jordan is resisting this like crazy. So look up that article, The Real Catastrophe for the Palestinians at Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. That's jcpa.org. It's an excellent article, and I think it'll help you understand what's going on. And so what do we see? We see all of this. Did you see this week? Did you see this? I'm serious. Did you see what was going on? So pay attention, understand what's going on. It can be distressing, I will admit. You know, it's very tempting to say, you know, just cash out and move someplace and never be heard from again. But some of those places don't have golf courses. I'm just kidding. But look, we need to be aware of what's going on. Look at what's going on in the church. Look what's going on in geopolitics. Look what's going on in culture. All of these things are just piling up. Pay attention. Read your Bible. It tells you the roadmap. Father, thank you so much for your word. Pray you'll bless us this week. Give us opportunities to share the wonderful news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who came to earth, lived a perfect life, died in our place on the cross, and gave us the gift of grace that if we believe in him and the work that he did, we will be saved. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.